show you how to upgrade your turbo compressor housing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the entire turbo assembly. I'm going to replace the compressor housing. The stock one I believe is 54mm compressor housing. I've got a kit to upgrade to a 62mm compressor housing. So I'm going to take this whole turbo off, rebuild it with the entire kit, and then put it back on. So to start, 7/16 deep socket to remove the intake. Next, you'll take a 7/16 deep socket to remove the exhaust clamp. Next, take a 5/8 inch wrench and remove the turbo oil feed line. So a 3/4 inch wrench on the bottom, 5/8 on the top. And then just place it out of the way. Take a 10mm socket and loosen the 2 bolts on the bottom for the oil drain. Now keep in mind there's a gasket on the bottom. Okay, now take a 7/16 deep socket and remove the feed for the intercooler. Watch the gasket that's in here too. What you can do is check with here, run your finger in here. If you got oil, lots of oil, you need to replace the seals the seals at the ends of the bearings on the inner part of the turbo. All right, next take a 15mm wrench, and you're going to remove the 4 bolts on the 4 nuts that are on studs at the exhaust manifold. Now the bolts may come with the nuts when you do this, and I'm just putting another wrench on the end of this 15mm wrench to get more leverage. All right, it might be a good idea to spray these like a day before you go to take them off with some penetrant. I'm just using WD-40 because that's all I've got right now. So you're gonna need a thin boxed end wrench to get these ones closer to the front of the engine, just because there's like no room in between the bolt head and the metal. All right, the 2 back ones came out just the nut, and the front bottom one came out with the stud, and I believe this top one's probably going to come with a stud too. I had to loosen this plate on the front so I can get access with a socket. This is a 15mm socket, 3/8 drive, and then bumped it up to a 1/2 inch drive on the end just for more leverage. And now I got the bottom one like this, and now I can get the top one like that, and then I'll try and break it loose. All right, let's see. Oh yeah, there we go. And the stud is coming with it. So I've put in some shop towels on the oil drain tube and the piping to the intercooler. as well as the exhaust manifold, just to keep debris out of the engine while I'm working on the turbo. And so now at this point I can go back to the workbench and do the rebuild on the turbo. I'm going to show you how to rebuild this turbo compressor housing. This is a H1C turbo off of my 1992 Dodge W250, and I'm going to rebuild the entire thing, and then I'm going to upgrade the compressor side of the turbo. And I've got a 62mm compressor housing, and then it has the compressor wheel that's machined to the compressor housing, and then you need this backing plate as well. This whole assembly I bought off of eBay from Turbo Lab America. I think his account on there is called like BMW Racing or something like that. So this is a nice turbo kit, compressor housing side of the entire turbo assembly. And I've already upgraded on my truck the exhaust housing. The 92 came factory with a 21 cm housing, and this is a 16 cm. So the entire assembly, I'll have the 16 cm exhaust housing, and then the 62 compressor wheel and compressor housing assembly. I think the stock, I'll have to double check, I think the stock is 54 or 52 millimeters. I'm sure someone can correct me. So on the compressor housing side, I'll show you the differences once I disassemble the whole thing, but you know, size wise, obviously this one's a little bit bigger, and then I think this one has an anti-surge groove cut on the inside, whereas this one I believe does not. Just take some WD-40, spray it on the seam of the exhaust housing. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a 13mm wrench and take these 4 bolts and 2 plates to hold the exhaust housing on. 2 of the bolts are not going to be able to come out because of the oil feed and drain, so we'll take the 2 off first, and then we got to bang the exhaust housing off a bit before we take the remaining 2 bolts out. Now we're going to take our 4-pound shop hammer, 3-pound in this case, and then evenly bang the exhaust housing off. Alright, I had to bang it back and forth with the 3-pound shop hammer and the steel pin, just on each side repeatedly on the concrete floor. And now that we have done that, it should be able to come loose. There we go. Alright, exhaust housing, and then our compressor housing and center core. Next, take an 11mm deep socket and remove the V-band clamp on the compressor housing. Okay, next we're going to take the compressor housing off. Same thing, just lightly hit it with a hammer. In this case it's already loose once I took the V-band clamp off, and then pull it straight up. Now you can take a look at your compressor wheel and then your compressor housing to see if there's any significant scoring or damage. So in this case, really doesn't look too bad at all. There's no significant scoring or damage on here. Just dirty, old. Keep in mind this is the original turbo from 1992. There's also a gasket on here for the compressor housing. We'll see if our new kit comes with one of these. Now we're going to remove the compressor wheel. So just put the tail end of the whole cartridge assembly in the vise on the 12-point nut at the bottom, and then this 13mm nut at the top is reverse thread, so we're going to be going clockwise to remove this. So there we go. There we go. The nut's loose. Take that right off, and now the wheel should just go straight up. Put our gloves on. Now I should just be able to pull the whole cartridge assembly right up off of the exhaust wheel. There we go. Okay. Alright, there's the whole assembly. At this point we can inspect the exhaust wheel or turbine wheel and shaft. So if there's any significant scoring on here, you might have to replace that, or if the exhaust wheel has damage on it, you might have to replace that. Now take your 8mm socket and take these 4 bolts holding the cartridge to this backing plate off. So now we can pull up on this cartridge or center core, whatever you want to call it, and then we take our backing seal plate and pull out the oil deflector, set that aside, and then we've got our center piston here. It'll come out as well, and set that aside. Okay, next we're going to remove the thrust bearing. So it's the thrust bearing, and then thrust collar is underneath it. Use a T20 socket, and they're regular threads. So we'll break these loose. I guess these have a bit of Loctite on them, so they might be a bit tight. That one's not bad. There we go. And then take this seal off as well. Comes with the new kit. So next we're going to remove, there's the journal bearings on the inside of this cartridge. So there's a snap ring, a journal bearing, then another snap ring, and then it's the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to take these small O-ring or snap ring pliers and then try and pry this guy out. There we go. Get this guy out. One snap ring. Journal bearing. I got one of the inner ones out, and then I'm going to try and get the other inner out. I'm just taking this picky tool with pointy end, go into the tiny little hole at the end of the snap ring, and prying out and pushing down. I just wanted to show you the differences between the 62mm kit and the stock compressor housing assembly. So I just want to run through the sizes here. So I'll do stock first, and then I'll look at the upgraded housing. So the stock compressor wheel here at the inlet is roughly 54mm, and then at the larger side of the wheel
it's 83 millimeters. And then the new compressor wheel is 62 millimeters at the inlet, and then the largest side of the wheel is 86 millimeters. And then the number of blades on this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 large blades, and then it has the 7 inner ones as well. And then the stock one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 large blades, and then it has all the smaller ones as well. So if you're gonna do this this upgrade kit, it's got the same size intake, which is a 4-inch roughly. Oh, let me get it over here. Yeah, so it's about 4 inches for your intake on the new one, as it is on the stock one, 4 inches. And then the outlet of the compressor housing is just under 3 inches. It's 74 millimeters, and then the stock one is the same, 74 millimeters. Other differences between the upgraded kit and the stock kit. Well, upgraded kit, this is a billet aluminum machined compressor wheel. The stock one is cast. I'm not sure what type of metal it is, but I think it's cast aluminum. And we got the upgraded backing plate here, and then the stock assembly with backing plate, and they are both, you know, a machined fit to the compressor housing. So the stock assembly fits the stock compressor housing well, as does the upgraded kit, and they're not reversible. So when you get the upgraded 62mm kit, you need to have this backing plate. I know you can do the 60mm upgrade kit and get away with not having the backing plate, I'm pretty sure. But it's always good to have the machined wheel to the housing. So these are not reversible. You know, obviously this one is smaller and does fit in here, but it's not machined to perfectly fit that housing, as the upgraded wheel does not fit the stock housing at all. So now that I've cleaned up everything, I cleaned up all my old parts. The center cartridge here at the exhaust side was very dirty and had a bunch of carbon buildup here. What I did was I put a bunch of spray nine there and I scrubbed it down, and then once it was mostly clean, I used just a green Scotch-Brite pad here just to clean up the surface a little bit, clean up the machine surfaces, and then the other side wasn't too bad. So now that these are all cleaned and dry, I'm going to reassemble using the rebuild kit that came with the 62mm compressor. The last difference that I forgot to mention between the stock and the upgraded compressor housing is the stock compressor housing does not have a groove in here for the anti-surge. So on this side, in between the inner lip and this outer lip, there could be a groove cut for the anti-surge, whereas this one, as you can see there, has that groove cut. So it looks similar to the stock one. Looks similar to the stock one, but the upgraded kit has the anti-surge groove. This one does not. Now, will that make a difference in terms of sound? I'm not sure. Maybe. Will it make a difference in terms of performance? Again, I'm not entirely sure. What I think is the purpose of that anti-surge groove is when you're in over boost situation, it allows the air to escape back through that groove. Alright, we're the next day here now. I'm going to assemble the entire turbo. So we're going to start here with the bearing housing. And the first thing that we're going to do is insert the snap rings and then the journal bearings, the new journal bearings out of the new kit. These are all new snap rings, new journal bearings. Will go, and you'll need some motor oil. I'm just using 15W40 motor oil, same stuff that goes in my truck, as assembly lubricant. So what I'll do is I'll apply some oil to the bearing housing, kind of just get it around there on both sides, and then I'll insert the inner snap ring, and then I'll put in the journal bearing, and then I'll put the outer snap ring. So with these snap rings, there's a bit of a rounded edge and a bit of a flat edge. You want the rounded edge to face towards the bearing, so that way it doesn't damage the bearing at all if the bearing spins or moves. So we'll take our small snap ring pliers, and then we'll insert it to the inner groove. Okay, so I've got it started, and then I take my snap ring pliers, or my snap ring pick, and push it down into the groove. And then I make sure it's seated by pushing and pulling on both sides of it and pushing it in towards the groove. Take my clean journal bearing, apply lubricant. Apply lubricant to the housing. Drop it in, doesn't matter which way. Okay, and then apply my second O-ring, rounded side in. There we go. Make sure she's seated, and then check that your journal bearing spins and moves in and out freely without falling out. And then we'll do the same to the other side. Here we go, got the bottom one seated. Oil up the bearing, and then take our snap ring, outer snap ring, and put it in. And then make sure your bearing spins and moves in and out freely. Okay, now that the inner journal bearings are all installed, the next thing we're going to do is install the thrust collar and then the thrust bearing. So just a little bit about the thrust collar and thrust bearing upgrade here. The old thrust collar is the same size as the new thrust collar, and I believe you can get an upgraded thrust collar, which is a bit thicker, but then you have to get your bearing housing machined down so that way your new thrust collar fits underneath your thrust bearing here once it's all installed. And in this case, the 62mm kit from Turbo Labs comes with the exact same size thrust collar as the old one. So we'll put the old one aside, and then it comes with an upgraded thrust bearing, which I guess is the HX35 version of the thrust bearing compared to the H1C. This is the stock one. This is the upgraded HX35 version, which I think overall it gives you more strength to the thrust, like the thrust collar and thrust bearing overall, compared to this one if you're making more power. So I really don't know whether or not or how well it works, but just an explanation for you. So what we're going to do here next is take a bit of oil, put it on our thrust collar, throw that, and this is on the exhaust, or sorry, this is on the intake side. And then we take our thrust bearing. I'm just going to put a bit of oil on here. Never hurts to have oil on both sides here. And then the countersinks are facing towards you when you're installing them. Make sure your thrust collar is centered. The next step here is we're going to be taking these 3 new screws, apply a bit of red Loctite or red thread lock onto each screw before you install them. And then set your torque wrench down. I just picked up this torque wrench here yesterday at Canadian Tire for $70. It was on sale. This does inch pounds, and we're going to be setting these down to 20 inch pounds. Now we're going to assemble our backing plate for the new compressor housing. So the first thing we're going to do here is take a bit of oil, put it on my finger, run it around this seal. This is the new seal out of the rebuild kit. And then we're going to place it into this groove on the back side of the compressor housing plate. Make sure it's seated all the way around. And then we're going to take our new piston seal, or piston ring seal, whatever it's called. Put some oil on it all around. And then we take our new snap ring from the kit and make sure it doesn't get bent when you install it. Place the open end down first and then run your finger around the outside till you hear it snap. Give it a spin, make sure it spins freely. And then same thing on the compressor housing. Make sure it's installed correctly and not binding. Just like that. Give it a push in. Give it a spin again. Make sure nothing's binding. Good to go. Now we're going to take this is our reused oil deflector. Place it just right on top here. And then we'll take our assembled compressor plate and just put it right on top. There's no specific direction. All those 4 bolts are the same. Just place it right on top. Make sure it's sat down properly, seated, and then you take it and just flip it right over. Now if I look straight down the middle, I can still see that my thrust collar is centered down the middle of the bearing housing. Now I'm going to take my 4 new bolts for the compressor housing backing plate, apply a bit of blue thread lock, and then get them started into the compressor backing plate. Now, I don't have a specific torque setting for these guys, but what we're going to do is we're going to go on our crosshatch pattern to tighten up the center section to the backing plate. And we're just going to make sure that they're tightened down snug. So now we're ready to install our exhaust wheel. So we take our new seal for the exhaust wheel. I forgot to mention in the disassembly, we take the old one off here. The new kit comes with a new one. So we lubricated this a little bit, placed it on here, and then same thing, we're going to start with our open end down here, and then run it around with our fingers, and then we've got it installed there. Okay, so now we're going to add a bit of oil into the exhaust end of our assembly, take our new heat shield, place it over top, centered, add some oil to our exhaust wheel shaft, and then around the seal area, and then just spread that around with our fingers here. Okay, and then when we place our new wheel in, it's not supposed to take very much force. We've got to keep in mind that as we go through here, we want to make sure we're centered through that thrust collar. And there we go. So we'll spin it as it goes through here, just to make sure it's seated. There we go. All right. So that's seated. At this point, we can take our new compressor wheel and new shaft nut and put on our new compressor wheel. So just a quick point here, these new compressor wheels come pre-balanced. So as you can see, there's a mark right there where they did their individual balancing. So we don't need to worry about placement to keep this thing balanced. Each individual part on here is individually balanced. So we don't need to worry about that. So this should just slide right on. So I was having a bit of a tough time getting the new wheel on there. So I just removed it and put a bit of oil on that shaft just to make it slide smoother. And now I'll attempt again here to place it on. It's a snug fit. And now what we'll do is we'll check this, make sure that everything spins freely. I'll just hold the heat shield there. Make sure nothing's binding. So that noise there is just the exhaust wheel hitting the heat shield, which is normal just because that's loose for now. Spin it left and right. Make sure she spins nice. And then what we'll do is I'll throw some red Loctite on here, and then I'll torque it down. All right, so I had to run to Princess Auto to grab the correct size nut to fit on here, or socket. So I thought I could use my, what was it, 11mm on here, but it didn't fit. So the correct size, I got my 12-point. Actually, these are kind of special. They had like 8 and 12-point sockets. So this is a 10mm or 3/8, I guess, 6, 8, and 12-point socket. So this fits pretty well in here. So I'm going to take my torque wrench and put it into counterclockwise, and it is 135 foot-pounds. I put some new Loctite on there, and now I'm going to tighten it down. If the compressor wheel spins a bit, that's okay, as long as the exhaust wheel is not spinning. There we go. That's tightened down to 135 foot-pounds. We'll check, see that everything still spins freely. There we go. Very nice. So now that I've got the compressor wheel torqued down, I'm going to take my new compressor housing seal, lubricate it the whole way around, and then we'll place her on there. Make sure it's seated correctly. I've got the wide face of the seal facing down. So now I'm going to take the compressor housing. I've cleaned it up a little bit on the inside here, just to make sure all the grease and residue is gone. And now I'm going to place it over top of the compressor wheel onto the backing plate, making sure that my seal hasn't been moved at all. Place that over top. And then once that's on there, I'm going to take I'm just going to flip this over. Take my V-band clamp and place it on top. So what I'm going to do here is, this eventually has to get torqued down to 110 inch-pounds. I'm just going to place the nut back on here, semi-loose, just until it's snugged up. This is a 11mm deep socket. And that's pretty loose there. I just want to be able to go to the truck and still rotate this backing plate, so that way I have the right orientation to my intercooler tube. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the exhaust housing. I'll put that on, put the retainer plates on, but loose, and then once I take it to the truck, I'll orient everything exactly and then tighten it all down. So now I'm going to take my exhaust housing here. I'm not going to bother repainting it, because eventually I'm going to plan on getting a exhaust housing turbo blanket, and that'll cover all this old paint up anyways. So I'm just going to make sure my inner lips here are both clean. This one and then this one are both relatively clean, and then I'm going to place it over top of the exhaust wheel, roughly in the orientation of where the exhaust outlet is going to be. So I'll place that down, and then I'll take my 2 new retaining plates and then my 4 new retaining bolts, and then I'll turn this guy over, making sure to not let it fall. And that's roughly in the right orientation. I'll put these retaining bolts. Okay, before I take these exhaust housing bolts back to the truck, I'm going to run them down with a tap and die. So I just did this one as a 3/8 16th thread, and I just ran it down just to chase the threads and clean up the threads. I'll just kind of take you through that now. You know, ran that right down. And then you can see this is the nut. I'll do the same thing with the top, is clean it up, but it already threads great. Now I'm just going to run this down with the top. Alright, I'm just going to clean up these studs, and I'll throw some anti-seize on them so the 2 at the back stayed in. And then I'll throw some anti-seize on the 2 that I'm going to put in. Just using this Motomaster nickel anti-seize from Canadian Tire. Don't forget to put your gasket on. The ribs face out. We're gonna put the front studs on. Take my 15mm wrench and start tightening these all. Alright, just get these guys snug with the wrench. Don't forget your new gasket for the oil drain before you install it. These 2 10mm bolts on the bottom. So I lined up both bottom bolts on the oil drain, not forgetting the gasket from the new kit. And now I'm just going to tighten these up with a 10mm wrench until they're nice and snug. Alright, next I'm going to put up the exhaust and put the V-band clamp back on there. The exhaust V-band clamp is an 11mm deep socket.
Okay, now that my exhaust is on, I'm going to take my 13mm wrench and tighten up all four of these exhaust hosing retaining bolts. Alright, at this point, before I put the oil feed line back on, I can now clock the compressor hosing. Until it matches up nicely with my intercooler line. And I can sort of twist this to where I think it's nice. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'll put this V-band clamp on. Now, this is also an 11mm deep socket. And I'm just going to snug this down. So now that that's on, I can sort of, my boots have some play in them, so I'm happy with this right here. And then I'll take my 11mm deep socket and then start to snug up my V-band clamp on the compressor housing. The torque spec for the V-band clamp on the compressor housing is 110 inch-pounds. At this point, I'm gonna take a little bit more engine oil and pour it right down the feed line for the oil feed. Get a bit of oil in there until it starts to flow out. And then I'll take my oil feed line. Okay, so now at this point, we've pretty much fully installed our new turbo here. So we're gonna do one last check inside here. Make sure we're spinning okay and that nothing's hitting. Both left and right, and then we'll give it a pull in and out, up and down, to see if we've got all regular shaft play. And if none of it hits the housing, then we're good. We can reinstall the intake boot and then we'll fire it up and see how she performs. So what I'm going to do before I put the boot on is I'm going to go start the truck, and then I'll come back out here and I'll check for one, air leaks around here, and then I'll check for oil leaks either at the fill port or the drain port, and then I'll check for an exhaust leak back here. So there was no leaks from the exhaust port or from the boost tube or from the oil fill and drain. So now I'll put on the intake, and this is again 11mm deep socket, and we'll just snug this guy down. So here's the finished install. Pretty much looks stock. I mean, the compressor housing's a bit different labeling on the outside, but there we go. Now I can be proud of this job well done, and we'll go for a little rip and see how she sounds.